Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the platform Crossing the Veil. And I have a very, very special guest today on our show, the Pennies Drop, a man world-renowned, based on all the people who are talking about his books and the content and the context of his research. And I just want to introduce you all to a very special man and a brother of the kingdom of Yeshua HaMashiach, Mr. Gary Wayne. Welcome to the Pennies Drop, brother.
Well, so happy to be here and to be able to connect on such a massive time zone change, but seems to be applicable or workable on both sides. So happy to be here and really looking forward to the conversation tonight, and hoping what we're going to talk about is going to maybe open the eyes or raise some curiosity amongst the audience that they may want to pursue this whole idea a little bit further. So really looking forward to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the goal for all of us, but as I said, being a baby in this game, so to speak, not necessarily in scripture, but in the profundity of what scripture is actually telling us, along with corresponding texts like the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, Joshua, the Book of Giants, and the list just goes on. I think I'll give you the table because I think you have more information than what I do. Here's Pere.
Hey.
Good up, brother.
Hey, man. Hey, Gary, how you going? Big fan of yours.
Yeah, very, very nice to meet you, Pere. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's just about it's early in the morning over here in Brisbane, so I was like struggling to get up.
We're connecting three countries here. Australia. Are you in Canada?
Yeah, Vancouver, Canada. Canada.
Yeah. So I almost said you were in the United States, but I thought I'd better check. You're usually on the road giving conferences.
Yep.
So,
well, I'm almost in the U.S. because I live about 8 kilometers off the border. So.
Okay. Awesome. I was just saying, Pere, to Brother Wayne, to Brother Gary. Sorry, I always call you Brother Wayne because of your last name, just like everybody else calls Brother Will, Brother Sheba, Brother Pounders, Brother Hall.
It's all good.
If you want to initiate proceedings, and I'm sure you've got tons more information, and we can, with the information that we have, we can present that on our individual shows. I think it's appropriate to let you have the floor. Obviously, we'll chime in where we can or where we deem appropriate, without interjecting rudely, of course.
Sure. And where would you like me to begin? Like, where do you think is a good place for your audience for me to start?
So Harry and I obviously did some research on Las Vegas, and without, obviously, as you and I have been exchanging dialogue in the emails, without getting too much into that, just because it's still unfolding, and I totally understand your stance on that. So I actually wanted just to touch on the structures in that, the occultic structures. We don't actually have to touch on the massacre itself, the shooting itself, but if we could just touch on the structures and talk about the significance of the number 32 without actually inextricably entrenching that to the Las Vegas shooting.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly I think everybody might be aware of some of the famous hotels and things that are in Las Vegas. And certainly the Luxor Hotel would be one of those, which sort of has that link, obviously, to prehistory and to Egypt. Just as, the obelisk is the other significant sort of figure. So pyramids, obelisks, those are sort of the main sort of imagery that people would have of Egypt. And of course, the shooting takes place in front of that setting, whether it's coincidence or otherwise, not clear yet. But anytime there's a mass murder, there's, people are making linkages to, is it an occult ritual or is it just coincidental? Not many things are super coincidental. This one might be a little bit more because we don't know much about the killer. He does the shooting from the 32nd floor after booking the hotel like 3 months in advance, which is kind of odd because in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which is basically housing the pantheon of Egypt as the gods that they tend to worship with Osiris and Isis and Horus as being their polytheist trinity, and all the other iconology that they use out of Egypt. You would think they would use the 33rd degree or the 33rd floor as opposed to the 32nd floor, because at the 32nd degree, they're not yet indoctrinated into the Luciferian doctrine,
That's right.
So they're not an adept yet. So is that a mistake? Or is it a coincidence? Or is it a message that this guy hadn't quite hit adept in the secret societies?
Yeah.
But there's nothing to connect him yet to being part of Freemasonry or any of the other secret societies. So, and typically in an occult ritual, though, the ritual is done not sort of away and not using the people that are being slaughtered, but in occult rituals that even go on to this day, which is a part of the adepts and the inner circle of the secret societies, they're going to have blood rituals, they're going to have blood sacrifices, there's going to be a whole bunch of sexual and pedophilia rituals and a whole bunch of other abominations that they like to do, but they're there and they're participating in it. And they also like to drink the blood of their victims. So again, this is kind of a way from being inside a complete ritual, unless there's something else going on underneath, either in within the hotels or underneath that they're doing parallel occult rituals and celebrating it. But the key thing that they do like to do, whether or not it's the secret societies or the globalists, is that they do like to create anarchy and continual anarchy with symbols so that they can drive people into the open arms of the globalists, because they're the ones sitting there. We have all the answers, even though they make the problem and then deliver the answer. That's their typical MO.
Create the chaos and then bring in the order.
Yeah, that's their typical MO.
What I wanted to touch base on, because we did, obviously, I was watching LA, Brother Len Marzulli, and he was the very first person that brought my attention to specific monuments like the pyramid. So then naturally, when I heard about the pyramid, the Sphinx, the obelisk, and then just the associations of the 32nd floor, because apparently, according to the research that I've done and other brothers have done, was it Neil Armstrong's father was a 32nd degree Freemason of the Scottish Rite Freemason Lodge, so to speak. And obviously, when you're doing research and you're corroborating that research and correlating it to other brothers' research and sisters for that matter, you trust that their research is accurate. So obviously we trust that your research is accurate, and Brother Rob Skiba and many other people in LA. But it was LA that first brought my attention to those factual tangibles. And what I actually wanted to touch base on here is because I watched one of your interviews with Brother Pounders and Brother Hall, and I think it was another brother, Brother David Carrico, and you spoke about Pan, and I did some of my own research into the obelisk and what that means, and the symbolic nature of it, correlating to the phallus, and then obviously to Pan itself and the exegesis or the passage that I was reading on regarding the obelisk. Well, Pere and I were both conducting that research simultaneously. We saw the linkages to Pan, and so that because we'd already planned this study prior to that research that Pere and I conducted, I just thought that was a harbinger, if you like, because I've heard on shows that you've conducted with Brother Pounders and Brother Carrico, etc., your extensive research into occult worship, the symbology, the structures, the rituals, and specifically Pan. A show I listened to, you talked about Peter Pan. So if you could divulge and elaborate more on the connection between Pan and the chimeric nature of Pan and the connection to the obelisk.
Yeah, so typically, Pan comes out of the Greek mythology as opposed to the Egyptian mythology and religions and legends. So at first sort of thought, most people don't look at them as being, kind of related, but what people will learn as they dig into the different religions and the polytheist religions around the world is that they have a very, very similar pantheon, right?
Yep.
So they all have almost an identical sort of hierarchy of the gods and the same gods. They just have different vernacular names within those pantheons. So you can make a lot of cross references and be bang on, just as long as you're understanding and relating these gods to the correct gods as to who they would represent in each of the pantheons. So in this case, Pan is associated with Apollyon and or Abaddon that's in the abyss, right?
Okay, well,
as the great destroyer. And the Pan god is a god of the woodland. He's a fertility god. And he is a god that flies around at night taking nymphs or virgin females and having his way with them. And he flies around with his private parts fully risen, right?
Oh.
To put it nicely. And so when we look at how that sort of translates into other areas, and I'm just going to quickly make a slight turn here, is Peter Pan is based on this woodland god, this fertility god, this god of immortality in Neverland or the other world or Anwin or Tartarus, whatever you want to call it, where these beings are in a different dimension or a different prison, or depending on which allegory that you want to use. And so Peter is also a euphemism for that same part of the body, your private parts, and Peter Pan, right? And of course, he's a little woodland god, and then you've got all these nymphs, like in the show. And so people need to understand that this whole ideology of Pan continues to be part of our society in ways that they don't understand. Now, Pan is also a god of the underworld, right? And so Set would be, I believe, his counterpart in the Egyptian mythology. So I already talked about Horus, Isis, and Osiris.
Yep.
Well, this is the brother of Osiris, who is the enemy of Osiris, right? And god of the underworld, just as Pan is the god of the underworld. And so you have this obelisk that we were talking about, and that in occult iconology and metaphors and allegories is a allegory for the erect member again, right?
Yeah.
So again, you have that sort of coming across of gods from other pantheons that represent the same sort of thing. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about that is that there are other gods that have different names in other pantheons that have a real connection to this Apollyon and the abyss just by researching who they are. So you might have gods like Nergal or Mot that are in the Sumerian pantheon. Well, they would be similar gods. And of course, Mot is the god that's referred to in the book that people are talking about, the Lost Book of King Og, and he's the brother of Baal,
that's right?
Son of El. So again, you have, I'm just sort of building that you've got these pantheons that are very, 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 very similar. Well, there's also a Druid god that is part of this whole sort of mixture. And in the Celtic mythology out of England and Ireland, you have a god who is a god of the woodland, a fertility god. And his name is, and he's depicted as a goat, as a as a god with horns and with cloven hooves, and sometimes as a deer, but mostly as a goat. His name is Cernunnos.
Okay, yeah. I read about
Right.
it.
And you also have another god in the Etruscan pantheon out of Italy, who is again the same god, and his name is CERN. Right. So all of these gods are.
Is that with a C or with a S?
What's that?
You said CERN.
Is that all C?
CERN.
So,
Yeah,
is that with
CERN.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
And what's interesting
Hadrian Collider. Yeah.
about all of that is that when you understand that these gods also are representative of Azazel as it comes out of, let's say, the book of Enoch, and we don't get Azazel out of the Bible except on the Day of Atonement for the scapegoat. Note the word
That's
goat,
right.
because we're talking about a goat god here.
Yeah.
For other sins, which are the sins of the antediluvian epoch, and Azazel was the one who's the scapegoat for all of the sins of the antediluvian world that caused the flood.
Thank you for teaching us the correct pronunciation of it, because I was saying Azazel.
Yeah, we were struggling on that one.
You can pronounce it either way, because sometimes it's spelled EL and sometimes it's IEL, and it's just a transliteration. The key thing to connect always in on these names is EL at the end, or AL, because that represents some sort of angel god as opposed to a demigod, right?
If I can just interject, I did some. Obviously, I watched Rob Skiba and yourself, and I saw how a lot of the critical information has been lost in translation, possibly deliberately omitted by such Luciferian factions who were translating the Bible from Hebrew, from the Greek, and then obviously the Septuagint.
Yep.
And I did some research, obviously, on Peter's writings about Tartarus or Tartarus, how whatever vernacular you want to slice that in. And then I went to Jude and I saw possibly a direct verbatim quote from Enoch, where, and I think it's verse 14, Jude ascribes a particular passage from Enoch into his writings, and I'm like, wow, if this is a direct quote, be it because it's in speech marks, then we really need to take a look, and that's where my journey started. Yeah.
I think you might be referring to 2 Peter as opposed to Jude 1:6. But I'm slicing hairs there. But certainly, it'll either be translated as abyss or Tartarus, depending on which translation that you're going to do out of 2 Peter. So, just so that somebody's, if they're fact checking us here, that
they'll always do that.
I'm pretty sure it was Jude 14.
Okay, could be that one as well. But I do know in 2
Peter. It definitely draws the correlation in the scripture that you just quoted as well. And then we did a show 2 Wednesdays ago called In the House Church on the same platform, Crossing the Veil, and we discussed, because the church, without being disrespectful and saying this in a loving way, because we want our brothers and sisters in the congregation, so to speak, to have this knowledge availed to them. And we were reading through Leviticus, and we got through to the scapegoat. And then because I already knew about this from you and Brother Skiba, so I just wanted to show people where it's been lost in translation. So I went back to the Hebrew scriptures and showed them what it actually says in the Hebrew scriptures. And a lot of the brothers who were tuned in, and one of the brothers who was at the shop, they were shocked. They were absolutely flabbergasted. How could they miss this? How
could they miss this? And why is there a second goat being sacrificed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and what's important about that, just to finish off the CERN thing, is that the CERN research going on in Switzerland, CERN, is very occultic in the rituals, and everybody's aware of that on the internet. But they're doing possibly 2 things there, and if not both, certainly one or the other. First, one thing is that they seem to be looking for is the God particle,
the God particle,
which is the Atma in the Vedas, which is a a particle that they believe hasn't been discovered yet that actually doesn't merge with the other particles. It just works through them and controls them, which they believe is what they're going to need for artificial intelligence, and where you link into all of the knowledge of the world. So it's like the knowledge particle that manipulates other particles. And then the other thing they're trying to do is supposedly is to drill into the abyss to unlock Apollyon, Abaddon, Pan, Azazel, whatever you want to call them, CERN, out of the abyss. So everything is always interconnected. That's the main point.
Touching on that, I was reading in Jubilees about there's this particular passage there. I've forgotten what the actual address for that passage is, but it's in Jubilees, and it talks about a whole lot of demons as we know to be disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And it mentions where Noah's sons, they were being tormented by these demons. This is post-flood, obviously. And it talks about one of the leaders, or the leader at that particular time, called Mastema.
Yeah.
And Mastema, obviously Noah asked for Yahuwah to put all these demons into Tatarus. Into the abyss, and then Mastema pleaded with him. I think it was leave 10% of us and put the rest in there. And I sort of drew the correlation between Revelation 9, which speaks about the star falling from heaven with the key to the abyss, opening the abyss. And I was wondering if that could be, if it was possible, just based on that research, that those demonic forces that were put into Tatarus, if they could possibly be the Nefesh that come out and get reconstituted or reinstituted with the DNA that apparently all these black projects are trying to resurrect, if you like, where you get the body and then Nefesh, and then they bring that together through some kind of ancient advanced technology.
Right. So a lot there to unpack. So let me start from the beginning, if I can, and just sort of go to what you're talking about. So Mestimus is what most people think is that's a variant of Satan or another small s Satan, but most people conclude is likely Satan, and it is out of the Book of Jubilees and possibly Enoch, if my memory serves me right on that. But he's definitely, that's not his real name because it doesn't end in EL. So, so if we are going to look for a Satan, you need to go to Lucifer 14:12, where it says Lucifer in Isaiah, but that's not the Hebrew word. The word is Hail-El, Heylel. So that would probably be his name, as opposed to Hel-El, which is Helel, which is an allegory for the king of Babylon. So two different things being talked about. But and demons, we're not told in a very clear manner in the Bible where demons come from. Right? Okay. You get that very clearly out of some of the apocryphal books like Jubilees or Enoch and Yasher and some of the other books. But and I just put out a post if people want to look on my Facebook page under Gary Wayne on the biblical case for demons, because most people don't believe that demons are different than fallen angels, rebellious angels. Biblically, the standard dogma is that the angel that rebelled is a degraded angel, like a satyr or a gargoyle or something like that in this world. But yet, if you follow the meaning of unclean spirits and devils and demons as it comes out of the King James Bible, take that back to Hebrew and Greek, you learn that when it talks about devils, it's talking about two different kinds. One is diabolos, that is in the New Testament that refers to Satan, and or it could be a small s Satan as well by the definition, or a god or a fallen angel. And the other one would be daemon or demon, which is an unclean spirit. And they're used interchangeably in Mark and Matthew, even in the same sort of sentence as being the same ones. And these are the ones that Jesus says they wander the earth as a spirit and looking for bodies to possess. right? And out of the occult, an angel doesn't possess. An angel avatars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And controls the body, as opposed to distorting the body and making its head spin around in circles and spew out green stuff like out of the Exorcist. So there's two different ones, and I make a nice case for that. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you talking about shape shifting there, or are you talking about because just from my research, stars and angels throughout the Bible, they're used interchangeably. So I'm wondering if when they cross over from that dimension into the first heaven, our dimension, if they're transmutating from their form in heaven and then transmutating into what we may be seeing in the Bible was shape shifting, etc.
Yeah, before the flood, we know that all the angels were able to seemingly take any shape that they want to take, right? And we see many different forms of angels in the Bible, from looking like men and you can't tell the difference, to looking like men but they're an angel, to giant angels, to shining beings, and on and on and on and on. So we know they can take different shapes. And if you look at Jude 1:6 and the word habitat, and in 2 Corinthians 5, the house that is in heaven, both of those terms come from the word oikaterion, which means a dwelling place for the spirit. And so in Jude 1:6, they left their habitat, a dwelling place for the spirit, and that seems to mean that they need to take a body or a form in this world, and they can also take any gender that they would like to take. And so they seem to want to have that body, but the fallen angels after the flood, we don't seem to see that sort of understanding. And so they seem to be in that degraded form, whether it's in a satyr or a gargoyle or whatever, but yet demons are something different because they're just spirit form. But yet you have these bodies of these sort of degraded angels, and I think that's one of the distinctions. And so in the abyss, what we learn is that from the Bible, and again supported by books like Enoch and some others, is that the impassioned fallen angels were the ones that were locked in the abyss. So Azazel, right, and his collection, the 200 Watchers, and any other ones that might have violated the laws of creation. But the ones who rebelled but didn't violate the laws of creation were not locked into the abyss. We're not told that demons are in the abyss, but one presumes what comes out of Revelation 9, led by an angel.
Yeah, which is why I drew a connection between Mastema and his cronies and Jubilees, and then obviously with Tartarus from Revelation 9.
Yeah, so one presumes that these scorpion-like beings, or the Gurab-Malu out of Sumerian, which is an exact same demon god that protects the temples and other gods out of the Sumerian mythology, might be part of these other demons and or violations of creation that were thrown into the abyss. So there's a possibility that there's both of the worst of the demons and the impassioned angels are all there. And they're the ones that might come out.
Can I just interject? Just because we talked about Azazel, I like that pronunciation. It's a new tip, I guess. So thank you for enlightening us on that. In Enoch, it says that Raphael finds Azazel, and that he puts him into this hole in a place called Dudael.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that could be the connection between Nimrod, because according to various studies, yourself, Brother Rob Skiba, so forth and so forth, and then us, a conclusion that I haven't drawn it completely, obviously, because there's no conclusive evidence. Not to say that it's circumstantial, but I saw a relationship between maybe Nimrod, because apparently he was born a normal man, and then through some process and procedure, maybe he got that text from Canaan, who was Arphaxad's son, started incantations, these golem incantations, summoned Mastema, and perhaps Mastema led him to Azazel, who is apparently in this maybe dimensional portal.
Yeah. So Nimrod's an interesting character, and whether or not he's in the abyss or not, and he's a character that comes after the flood. But I would also note that there's nothing to say that because of what he did that he couldn't be put in the abyss, just as if there was a second incursion of the violations against the laws of creation by angels, again, that those ones wouldn't have been put into the abyss as well. It's, it's very, very likely. So this Nimrod guy, he becomes, as you say, a giant, even though he's the son of Cush, which is not how Nephilim are created. Their fathers are the sons of angels, right? So somehow he changes or becomes a giant, and you take that back to Hebrew, and it's like breaking an oath or breaking your word. So something affects him, and we don't know what, other than he takes on the occult pantheon and reestablishes the antediluvian Enochian mysticism after the flood, as he partners with Hermes, who finds the two pillars of Lamech or Enoch, and understand that there's two Enochs in the Bible, one son of Cain, one son of Jared, right? So a good one and an evil one. So this is the evil one we're talking about right now. Yeah, who develops mysticism and the secret societies from the seven sacred sciences. So Hermes finds these two pillars after the flood, and he at least finds one, and he finds the vaults that Enoch left under the pyramids to bring back to Babel, along with the mystery religions, but the technology as well, because it's believed in the occult circles and Freemasonry in particular, who write about all of these things that I'm talking about right now. These are occult Masonic sources out of the History of Freemasonry by Albert Mackey, develops these sciences to a level that is greater than what we have today. And we know that that is likely the case, because if we look at what Jesus says about the end time and his second coming, he says it will be like the days of Noah. So if we are at the technology that we have today, we're not in the end times yet, then that means if you extrapolate that and you buy into that, that the antediluvian epoch had a technology greater than we have today. So if this is what Nimrod receives from Hermes at Babel, they do a number of things here. What they do is they start to develop this technology, and their first manifestation is going to be the building of the city and the tower of the fifth science, which is geometry, but in the craft it's called masonry. Nimrod becomes the first grand master of Freemasonry after the flood, according to occult circles, and writes the Constitution after the flood. And if they continue to develop the technology to do DNA manipulation or other violations against creation, then he perhaps could become a Gibberim. Doesn't say Nephilim, it says Gibberim.
Gibberim, which is what I was going to touch on.
And you want to be careful of the word Gibberin, because it's used 158 times in Hebrew, not always for a Nephilim.
Yeah, I did note that with Gibberim, it draws connections with elevated thinking, because it says, I think it's in the Book of Jubilees again, where it speaks about Gibberim having a heightened brain activity, and the size of their brains were just massive.
Again, certainly possible. Well, certainly they had these elongated skulls, right? Because they had that serpent-type look, and these were bigger skulls, so they would have had possibly bigger brain capacity. But in the Bible, we don't get it used at any point in time of the 158 times for being more intelligent. But you do have that account in the apocryphal side. So I like reading that stuff for context, but if I can't prove it biblically, I like to say, that's interesting, it's possible, but we'll take it into account, but we can't take it as scripture. So, but it is used, but because at times, Gibberim is used as a man twice. As in Ruth 2:1, it could be a strong man or a valiant person or an upright man. A lot of different terms. It's also used as an angel in the Psalms as a Gibberum. So you have to be careful. But most times it means a giant. Most times it does mean giant.
It's funny you should say that because I did some research on the word for watches, erin, which is Aramaic, and it talks about the watches of the fallen angels being erin, and I was like, okay, so that distinguishes the watches or these fallen angels from the rest of the angels. But then, as I carried on into my studies, it refers to all of them because it referred to Raphael finding Azazel, and then obviously the seven archangels mentioned in Enoch.
Yep. Yeah, and again, whether or not those are the actual names, because we don't know. They're not in the Bible, although Raphael will be in the original King James Apocrypha, where the Apocrypha is, 14 books, as I recall, not part of that. Likely it's Raphael, but again, scripturally, we have to be careful of that. But what we do know is the star that falls in Revelations to open the abyss is likely going to be an angel, because a star, as in Job, is an angel, as in 1:6 or 2:1 or 34 or 38:4-7. So, but is that a fallen angel that opens it up, or is that
one of the
or is that? I think it's not a fallen star. I think it's an actual angel from God who goes down to open it up, and that what they're trying to do at CERN is to bring about the end time at any time except for the ordained times, but they're going to fail, right?
So they're going to keep until Yahuwah's ordained time.
Yes.
Yeah, totally concur with that. In my original research, I was thinking that angel in Revelation 9. I was like, that's got to be Satan. But as I did more research, I'm like, oh, hold on. Maybe it is an obedient angel who's coming down at the Muad'Dim, the appointed times, and opening that according to the prescribed time that Yahuwah has already put in place.
Yeah, because you would think it would say, a demon or a devil or some sort of degrade if it was.
Absolutely. That was my reasoning, because the Bible is so specific on using those particular terms to ascribe to Luciferian forces, demonic forces, and distinguish between the demons and then between fallen angels. So, yeah, absolutely. So what I would like to do now, if it's okay with you, if we could touch on Isaiah 19:19, just because a lot of brothers and sisters in the church all around the world, when I talk to them about this stuff, especially that particular scripture, they're like, "What altar?" Because they have this modern day perception that the Egyptians built the pyramids, and of course they possibly could have, but according to my research, I don't think they did.
Yeah, I certainly don't believe that they did, and certainly the Masonic accounts would suggest that the technology, possibly came from Enoch. But I'm not. But I'm not even convinced, though, that because I think the pyramids are even older than the time of Enoch. So they may have been built by the gods. Not that Enoch didn't build pyramids, because I think that was part of the technology. So it's one of the two, I think. And everybody looks at the pyramids being built by Khufu or Khafra in about 23 to 2400 BC. But clearly on the inventory stela from Egypt, it says Khufu restored the pyramids and that the pyramids were already built. And if you look on the victory tablet of King Menes, and he would have reigned 2950 to 3000 according to secular records. It depicts the Great Pyramid, just as you've got by other Sumerian researchers depictions of the pyramids from about 3000 BC as well, which means it probably would have been built sooner than that. And Flinders, who was archaeologist in 1901 also noted depictions of the Great Pyramid etched onto Narmer's tablet, which would be, either he's around the time of Menes or he's the same as Menes, right?
Yep.
So, and then you've got the alignment of the Sphinx, with Orion at 10,500 BC, according to astral procession. And you also have the water erosion that
I was watching it last night. What you're about to refer to, I was watching it.
That I think was John Anthony who wrote it. That dates it also back to around 10,000. So I think the pyramids are certainly older than what we're told by Egyptologists and secular history, because
I don't believe anything they say anything.
So, and I just wanted to throw a little bit of evidence out there so that the audience doesn't think that we're just making it up to make a good story.
Please do. I actually wanted to share that particular scripture. I'll get it ready and then I'll share it. Isaiah.
It is, while you're bringing it up, it is a fabulous prophecy. And I suggest everybody read it and read it very, very carefully, because it's got some wonderful stuff in there, let alone what you're probably going to bring up. But maybe you will bring that part up as well.
Yeah. Oh, look. We could probably just. What I'll do is I'll share it right from verse 1, and then that way we can go through it and talk about the particular features in it.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Try not to sound like Rob when he does it. Exactly. So I love watching that, brother. Okay. So as it says here, Isaiah chapter 19, a prophecy against Egypt. Prophecy against Egypt. See, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt. The idols of Egypt tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians melt with fear. I will stir up Egyptian against Egyptian, brother will fight against brother, neighbor against neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The Egyptians will lose heart, and I will bring their plans to nothing. They will consult the idols and the spirits of the dead, the mediums and the spiritists. I will hand the Egyptians over to the power of a cruel master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares the Lord Almighty. Obviously talking about Yahuwah there. The waters of the river will dry up, and the riverbed will be parched and dry. The canals will stink. The streams of Egypt will dwindle and dry up. The reeds and rushes will wither, also the plants along the Nile at the mouth of the river. Every sown field along the Nile will blow away and be no more. The fishermen will groan and lament, all who cast hooks into the Nile, those who throw nets on the water will pine away. Those who work with combed flax will despair. The weavers of fine linen will lose hope. The workers in cloth will be dejected, and all the wage earners will be sick at heart. The officials of Zoan are nothing but fools. The wise counselors of Pharaoh give senseless advice. How can you say to Pharaoh, I am one of the wise men, a disciple of the ancient king? Where are your wise men now? Let them show you and make known what the Lord Almighty has planned against Egypt. The officials of Zoan have become fools. The leaders of Memphis are deceived. The cornerstones of her peoples have led Egypt astray. The Lord has poured into them a spirit of dizziness. They make Egypt stagger in all that she does, as a drunkard staggers around in his vomit. There is nothing Egypt can do, head or tail, palm, branch, or reed. And that day the Egyptians will become weaklings. They will shudder with fear at the uplifted hand that the Lord Almighty raises against them, and the land of Judah will bring terror to the Egyptians. Everyone to whom Judah is mentioned will be terrified because of what the Lord Almighty is planning against them. In that day, 5 cities in Egypt will speak the language of Canaan. and swear allegiance to the Lord Almighty, one of them will be called the city of Sun. Is this one of the other specific sections of this Exodus that you're referring to?
I'm sorry, I
Verse
didn't understand the question.
This verse 18, because you said there's some other parts in
Oh yeah, I mean you've covered a lot, but as you go on, I mean there's also some interesting parts. But I think what you wanted to talk about probably is contained with what you've already talked about. Yeah.
Verse 19. I mean it says, I stole this phrase from Brother Skiba because he always says point blank, so I just say point blank now. So it says here, and that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the heart of Egypt, and a monument to the Lord at its border, and it will be a sign and witness to the Lord Almighty in the land of Egypt. So just those two verses there, because I did some research on the Great Pyramid of Giza, because as I started researching our top technology that we're about to synthesize to build free electricity prototypes, I looked at this because our technology is based around the magnetic qualities of granite, stone, the piezoelectric qualities of quartz crystal, etc., etc. And when I saw these particular passages, I looked at the border, because if you do your research, obviously, and you have Egypt was once upon a time split into northern Egypt and southern Egypt, and where it talks about the border here, I looked at the demarcation, and the Pyramid of Giza sits bang on that demarcation, north and
Mm-hmm.
south. So then I started thinking, well, could it be that the Great Pyramid of Giza was actually built by maybe Enoch, possibly people before him, as this altar to Yahweh, by Yahweh's command and the knowledge that he gave those particular people at that time, and therefore not the Egyptians as the status quo consensus holds today.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, it doesn't say pyramid in there, but you take by the references of the great monuments that it's probably referring to the obelisk and the pyramids, as opposed to the Sphinx, because that would be more of a cherubim statue, right? So,
Yeah.
So when you look at what the other side, the spirit forces, do right from the beginning is they try and counterfeit.
That's what I was going to allude to. Yep.
Everything that God does. They don't seem to want
Yeah.
to create anything new. It's just
Yeah.
as they want to create a realm or a place where Hallel can be king or God like God is,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
working separately. But he wants to do everything identical with the same sort of organizational government, and
Yeah.
just doesn't want to be answerable to God. So even when they create the Nephilim, the violation against the laws of creation is they're creating a being that's a physical God in the physical world that has an immortal spirit that doesn't come directly from God. It comes from the fallen angels, which is why God limits.
Yeah.
So it's a counterfeit spirit, as what Enoch would talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which, of course, I believe is the demons that we see today. If it's the bodiless spirits of the original Nephilim.
Yeah.
So, and just as they're going to counterfeit the Messiah, that's why he's called the Antichrist or the false Messiah or the prophet. They're going to have a false prophet. They're going to have a false millennium. Everything is designed to counterfeit. So they usurp everything, wrap it in, but change it or make it impure in the application thereof to defame God. But typically, that's not done by the fallen angels. They use their offspring, either the Nephilim and the demons and or the humans, who are stupid enough to do this because they already know the power of God and aren't going to anger him to the point of punishing them before their time. So this whole ideology about pyramids, it is a cult, but only, I think, because they've usurped it. Now, what the pyramid was used for in the ancient times is we're just starting to probably get our minds around now, and I certainly think that that's
there's
going.
a massive awakening going on all around the world. People are waking up. People are starting to wake up, and if I want to heap praise on people, it's because of people like you, brother Wayne, because of people like Rob Cuba, L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Tom Horn, and you know there's a vast ocean of brothers and sisters who are looking into to scripture via the corresponding biblically endorsed texts, and then as we begin to understand the actual science behind it, for example, stargates, dimensional portals, the fact that they had some form of electrolysis, or that it's purported that there is, it's postulated, and based on our research that we've been doing back here in New Zealand and Australia with this technology that we're building, it's, if anything, if we're successful with the technology, it's going to corroborate exactly what the pyramid was. Well, one of the functions of the pyramid, which was to produce electricity as produced later by Nikola Tesla, and various other people. And just touching on Nikola Tesla, J.P. Morgan, the connection with the
Electricity.
Carnegie,
Yep.
electricity, skull and bones, the Masons, and all that, you know.
If I can jump in there for a couple of seconds and just have a bit of a quick talk, how Tony was mentioning about Isaiah and how the river of the Nile would dry up and all that kind of stuff, and the fishermen. If you look today south of Egypt, there are a lot of countries that are actually starting to harness the water of the Nile River, and what's happening is Egypt's starting to get worried because all these places are putting up hydro electricity dams and stuff. They're worried about the fishing. They're worried about the agriculture of Egypt because everyone else is starting to peel off and access the resource.
Yeah.
So once hydroelectricity becomes more of a no, today, everyone knows that water is a scarce commodity and everyone's just going for it. So now we're looking at alternative energies, and when the scripture talks about everyone will turn towards Giza or turn towards his altar, sorry, and it's like, well, is there a possibility everyone's thinking about something else? If you read up on the United Nations 20 sustainability development goals, they're looking at sort of cleaner energies and all this sort of stuff. And it's just surprising how, when you look at the scriptures in a different context, you can actually orientate it to the ground on what's happening in the world today. And once you are able to orient, then you can get your bearings, and then you say, this is what the scripture means, this is what this scripture means. But if you orientate it in a different way, it's like watching a 3D movie without 3D glasses. You can't see the full effect. So if you were to put on a different perspective, then perhaps what the scriptures are saying is correct in the context that it's trying to describe. It's only because of, I think, translations and multiple translations from ancient text to English or to even my culture, Maori, everything sort of gets lost. So you have to go back to the origins of the beginning to understand what it means in the context of today. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when you read it, you know it's a prophecy, and you know it's an end time prophecy, and the cruel king is likely the Antichrist, because I don't know who else would fit that sort of description. And everybody's fighting against each other, brother against brother, another again end time marker. And so when the Nile River dries up, and everybody's looking towards Giza and God's altar, does that mean that that the pyramid was actually built by God's angels and was used as an altar, or not? We don't know, but that's certainly a possibility. But as Anthony was also saying about this pyramid is that, I mean, it's talked about in mundane sort of
Yeah.
understanding of a power source, as in just like an electric generator. But it could be significantly more than that,
More than that.
depending
Yeah.
on if it's tied into the ley lines or
Yeah.
whatever else that around the world.
Different
And
modus operandi, eh?
yeah, and you are also tying in a Stargate at the same time. So if it's a
Yep.
Stargate, it's going to have to generate an
Tremendous energy.
incredible amount of power
Yep.
to create a portal, an artificial portal into another
Yep.
dimension, as opposed to a natural portal, right?
That's right.
And there might be both. Certainly in the occult beliefs that there's both. But sticking with the idea that if it is a portal as one of the purposes for a pyramid, let's go back to Nimrod for a second
Yeah.
and what
To
he
the
was
ziggurat.
doing.
Yep.
Okay, and he's building a ziggurat, and even though it's depicted as a circular tower, a ziggurat
It's actually a
or a
pyramid.
circular tower or pyramid were considered the same thing in antiquity, right?
Yep.
Now, most people look at, and also remember that I was talking about this technology and knowledge that was brought in by Hermes to build this, and how far they were advancing this knowledge. And we get a little bit out of that out of the Tower of Babel narrative, where it says, as one people working together with one language,
Yeah.
nothing is going to be prevented them from doing. So we see knowledge developing fast and in a way God is
Yep.
concerned about so early after the first apocalypse
That's
by
right.
water. Now, if we look at the word Babel in the Hebrew understanding of that, that means confusion of languages as you take it back to Hebrew. But Nimrod is also the father of the Semites in Assyria, which is talked about in this
That's right.
prophecy as well, and
Yep.
Yeah.
Akkad and Babylon and Persia. I
That's
mean, he's
right.
the father of all of these people. Now, in Akkadian, the word Bab-El,
Yep.
notice and I'll go back to what I said earlier in the show, that
Yep.
El stands for angel or God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Bab in
That's right.
Akkadian stands for star.
Yeah.
So, or I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sorry, not star, as a gate. It stands for gate. So you have a
Hey.
gateway of the gods.
Yep.
So the
That's
Akkadian translation of Babel is a stargate, essentially.
yeah.
And so he was probably trying to create through that ziggurat, which is why
Yeah.
God didn't permit it to be finished. One of the reasons why he didn't permit it to be finished.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we're just learning now. And certainly the pyramid is not placed as a burial site. You
No.
know,
No way. No way.
yeah, there's no burial chambers in there, so it's got a completely different function, and it's also aligned to the belt and the head and the shoulder to Orion at 10,500 BC again. From
Yeah. Yeah. And if we want to elaborate just a little bit further, and you probably already know this, brother Wayne, but if you look at the spring equinox, the winter equinox, and then if you look at the summer solstice, all those things. At the time it was built, it was aligned true north. Now for me, because I'm not too sure which way I'm swaying, ball earth or flat earth, but for me I believe that it's aligned magnetically north, and obviously because I've done research on the analemma of the sun, the moon, and the luminaries, and how they all project their own resonant frequencies, or they project frequencies within a range. For example, the moon casts cold light, not warm light, as opposed to the sun. And then if you actually train a telescope on stars, they don't look like what we've been told what they look like.
yeah,
They look like electromagnetic uh, consoles, if you like, and perhaps that's the form that angels are in, while they're in that sphere or beyond our dimension, and then when they cross over into our dimension, they become these angels that appeared to Lot uh, at at Sodom, so to speak. So there's a lot of tangibles that can be touched on, especially as you do more research, and if you bring that all the resonant frequency back to the pyramid of Giza, that's what it's really operating on. And if you look at the properties of granite, especially the magnetic properties of granite, the piezoelectricity, the quartz that's in it, tourmaline and clear quartz, etc., you begin to understand that this altar that I believe that the Great Pyramid of Giza is and wasn't built by the Egyptians, built by possibly the obedient angels themselves, possibly even the seven archangels that are mentioned in the Book of Enoch as this altar, possibly the very first altar on earth to Yahweh himself. And if you go back to Revelation 20:21, you see the new earth and the new heaven, new earth, Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem will be come down from heaven to earth. And maybe because the first Jerusalem possibly has been made defunct, possibly due to a pole shift, and therefore that meridian no longer um, is epicentered over that particular pyramid in Giza anymore, which is why it may not operate at efficiency or even operate at all. But you see the dimensions of that New Jerusalem. A lot of seminaries, Bible colleges, they equate that to a cube, but it doesn't say that. It just says gives you the measurements for the bottom as a square, but it just gives you the height, which to me is a pyramid.
Yep. Yeah, I mean everything that's done in the occult has sacred geometry,
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
anything that would be done by God would have perfect geometry as well.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
again, they're trying to counterfeit those types of things, and
Or
I
deception.
always, oh yeah, and so I also try and understand the pyramids. These things are built in a way we can't do today,
Yeah,
to a level of masonry, accuracy, all the complex things that they're built to for astrological alignments, to
yeah,
everything in mathematics and the sacred geometry. It's beyond our ability to do it today.
yeah. It is.
Now, these stones are also carved and masoned in a way that at the time they were probably perfectly smooth and perfect joints and
Yeah,
everything like that.
yeah,
Now, if I try and reconcile that with what God is doing with the Israelites in the Israelite law for his altar, he doesn't want anything that is carved or smoothened or shaped,
yeah,
because
That's
that'll
right.
defile the
yeah.
altar or any of the steps leading up.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
because they didn't possess the technology in Moses' time to produce a precisely engineered altar.
And I think that is because all of the things on earth were usurped
Yeah,
That's
by
right.
the fallen angels and the polytheist religions
yeah,
and
Yep.
used in a way that was going to lead people away from God and also exuded pride and hubris. And,
Yeah.
and so I think that's why the Israelites were given those sets of laws. And again, I find that to be fairly consistent with what we talked about, the counterfeiting and what they do. And
yeah,
so, and that's why they don't want anything made of heaven as an idol either as part of the laws, right? Because
yeah,
again, that heaven on earth ideology in occultism is part of it. So they want to duplicate things in heaven on
yeah,
earth,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I think if you
yeah,
take a step back and try and look at what was done in prehistory, what they're trying to do today, but look at the example that God did with the Israelites and then understand why. Just
why? Yeah,
as laws were given that you can't drink blood, you can't eat animals that were in rituals or strangled, and you can't do sexual violations. These are
yeah,
seemingly laws that were put in place that were done in the antediluvian epoch that he's trying to prevent, or cross pollinating or crossing species
Yeah.
to create hybrid plants or hybrid animals, right? Again,
yeah.
antediluvian
AKA Pan.
violations, just as drinking blood was,
Yeah,
and still is today.
yeah, absolutely. AKA Pan,
Yeah.
the chimeric half human, half goat. Yeah. So when you listen to when you listen to the myths that, for example, the Clash of the Titans in Greek mythology, and various other animal hybrid human depictions all over the world, and you start correlating and making the connections, and there's always these sacred geometrical altars, whether they be pyramids, whether they be Stonehenge, whether they be Sacsayhuaman, Ajanta Tambo, all those places, you know, monolithic Cyclopean architecture, and just
Yep.
you know, the modern day consensus with archaeologists is that they were built by primitive civilizations. Yeah, history tells us that primitive civilizations occupied these spaces, these
Yep.
locations. But we know just by looking, especially us because we're technologists, you know, I mean, I watched a documentary where these people at Pumapunku, they were telling us that the Aztecs, they didn't know about the wheel, and then you go to the quarry, and all of a sudden you find this perfectly hewn stone wheel with
Yeah.
a perfectly almost computer aided round hole cut
Yep.
straight in the middle of it, and it's like, explain that.
Yeah. How could they not know about the wheel if they could build these great megaliths? Of
Yeah,
course, seculars will say they'll come up with ridiculous statements as to how and when they were done, and it makes absolutely no sense.
yeah, yeah,
And I also, I would look at, just the idea of pyramids, that this notion that they're almost on every continent except for Antarctica, although there's a lot of speculation that there's pyramids there under the snow, unproven yet, but probably likely, is how do you
probably
account
like
for them? Yeah. How do you count for them almost on all continents in every
continents.
location around the world with similar sacred sort of geometry? And some of them are done in exact relative size. They may
For
be
the
a little
Great
bit
Pyramid of
different, but
Giza.
the geometry is still the same. So
Yeah, the angles, everything.
yeah, you just can't account for that otherwise. You get the mathematical zero with all the different things around the world, from the giant stories and how they were created, why they were destroyed, the flood
Yeah,
story, the little people, the pyramids, on and on and on. You get the mathematical zero in a
yeah,
hurry of the
absolutely.
likelihood of that happening in
Yeah,
coincidence.
far out. I listen to all these people, that guy Tyson Neil deGrasse, and various other NASA and co. I like to call them. Obviously, they were, you know, people refer to them as the Illuminati, the Freemasons, all connected in my point of view. But that's just my point of view. But I look at being a technologist and being a student of physics and maths. And I did some research on how piezoelectricity is actuated, and it's from mechanical stress. Sense when you're building a pyramid, because electricity, there'll be a higher concentration at the bottom level because of the amount of mechanical stress that's being put on them. And then if you see the connection of the water underneath the pyramid that most people don't know about because they just see it from the top, immediate perception is, oh, well, this is a desertous terrain. There's no way water could exist here, but yet from various scholars and researchers and people who are out there in the field doing their experimentation, they're starting to find now that the supposed tomb of, I think it's Osiris, underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, where they've drained all the water out, their water has been there for millennia.
Yeah, yeah. And just as you've got water erosion on the Sphinx, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. As you referred to
the
before.
climate was different, and yeah, they have to have things like water in place there
Yeah,
to start to even think about building these types of megaliths, or they had a different technology, right? And it
yeah.
certainly wasn't giants lifting these things. They may have helped,
Like
but I
like
think they had.
levitation.
Yeah. So, and in the occult, they like to call the technology anti-gravity. So whether it's that or it's just technology using water or some sort of power that
Yeah,
they're,
I
they're
for me, just based on the research that I've been doing, especially over the last 10 months, because been doing massive research on Curlian cameras and energy flow, and then torus fields and the magnetic field and the NLMA. Again, I refer to the NLMA of the sun being a large body that produces large amounts of energy, but how it produces that energy through resonant frequency transmission. And then all of a sudden you realize, if you do more research, that with cymatics. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with cymatics, but Pere actually he led me down that trail as we started studying electromagnetism, and I've seen various accounts in my research on people who have, well, I wouldn't say invented because Yahuwah created all this technology, we just discover it. But there's this guy who created, or who came up with the, because he was fascinated with this insect that just aerodynamically looked challenged to travel the way that it was traveling, and he figured out that just like bees, their wings aren't actually doing the job that helicopters' rotator blades do. They actually, if you do your research, you look at a bee when it's hovering in a stationary point, drawing nectar or pollen from a flower or any plant for that matter. The beats of its wings are actually producing metal C, the frequency of metal C, and it has a cavity inside it that actually allows it to levitate and defy gravity and move in different directions.
Yeah. It's all knowledge, isn't it? But we don't want to get too caught up on the knowledge, because that's the thing that the occultists say is one of the two things that lead to godhood. So through
We're very
gnosis. So
mindful of that. Very
yeah,
mindful.
it's but the difference though is because a lot of people say, well, are you against science or are you against knowledge? No, I'm not against it. It's how it's used that is the key. Knowledge is neither good or evil. It's the application thereof, and you have to have the wisdom to be able to use it in a positive manner. So that gets to be the issue. I was also just thinking that in the passage that you were referring to in Isaiah 19:19 is that it talks about this monument on the border as well.
I'll just put that back up for our viewers, just while we're talking about this, so they can reference it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there will be in a monument to the Lord at its border. Well, if you take the word monument back to Hebrew, it means column. So again, I think the column or the obelisk has been hijacked as well as the pyramid, just again to make a consistency of the argument that we've been talking about earlier, and that's going to be at the border. So I would expect it's a significant column that they're going to build, or an obelisk, but again, it'll be used in a manner that's designed to honor God, not dishonor God, and to lead people to God. And it's going to be in the end time. And then what's really interesting as you move on in there, so you get into like verse 23, and it talks about a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And again, we were talking about Nimrod and the father of the Assyrians, right? And the Babylonians and the Akkadians, and Egypt, which comes from Ham. And then it moves on to say that, in that day, you're basically going to have Israel being a third, with Assyria and Egypt being the other.
Absolutely.
Who's missing from the three sons? Japheth.
Japheth.
Yeah. So why are they missing? Well, I think it's got a lot to do is not that the descendants of Ham married into giants, which they did, not that some Semites married into giants, which they did, but I think what happened with Japheth is that not only did they take some giant names within that whole genealogy, like Gog and Magog, which are typical Greek giant names, I think they polluted themselves to a level that is they're not going to be part of these three peoples in the future time. And then you take that and say, okay, and then in the end time, we're going to have a Gog and Magog war. And then at the end of the 1,000 years again, you have another Gog and Magog war when Satan is released from the abyss. I think there's something there that suggests that what the descendants of Japheth did is of a significant nature, not only in the ancient time, but all the way through history, and how they perpetuate the bloodlines of the Nephilim, because as they escape the Middle East, they appear into Russia and into Germany and into Norway and into the British Isles, which are all sort of Tuatha De Danann or the tribe of Danu and or Scythians, as they're like to be called, which are the area where the descendants of Japheth migrate to and marry into, and Russia descends out of Scythia as well. And the Scythians take their history back as the lizard people, as the dragon people, back to Tartarus, from the giants escaping out of Tartarus as the start of their people. So I think there's a significance to that Isaiah verse with the three peoples that are mentioned there.
I totally agree with you. When I was in China, my time in China, I got talking to some. I ventured out of the metropolis of Shanghai and visited some more village-like places and just noticed their use of different stones, aka onyx stones, as mentioned in Genesis 2. How they utilize gold for healing and all those sorts of things. And I sat down with some of their old people because they noticed I was staring at things that most people don't stare at, because it's the average tourist, which is what they thought I was. They just walk around these monuments, take photos with them, and then carry on. And there's photo opportunities. Whereas me, I was actually looking for symbols and structures, and I noticed this. And then a young girl who actually lived in Shanghai, her great grandfather was there. He was on his deathbed, but she come over and she said, "Oh, what are you looking for?" So, I just got some crazy theories that possibly your people are from Canaan. He just looked at me and smiled. I was like, what are you smiling about? She said, "Well, what you're talking about is correct. We come from, our ancestors are from the tribes that Joshua and Caleb were sent in to exterminate. Those are their ancestors. The Chinese come from the land of Canaan."
Yeah, and when you dig into Chinese, and a lot of it's been destroyed by the communists, but you dig into their history and their religions and their mythologies, is that their culture and their people migrate from the area of Mesopotamia to India, to the Indus Valley, and then further over into China. Right, and so this religion comes from that they had, whether it's called Taoism in ancient Chinese religion, as opposed to the Taoism name that's called now, and that they have this understanding that their original founders and royal family, they come from the gods and the demigods, which are the dragon people, which are again the same sort of understanding, and that a Naga is that, of course, their civilization sort of came by, as a stopping point, and then on into China. So there's a lot of Arabic that has the characters of Chinese, as the smaller ones were built in prehistory. There's a lot that goes back to a flood and the 8 survivors of a flood. And so there is this still tradition that's still alive that is congruent with, even though it's from a polytheist perspective, with what is taught in the Bible. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
You mentioned, actually, I'll let you finish before I go.
Pardon me?
You finish before I go, because you just had something on your mind that was important.
Well, and again, because we're talking about the end time here with the Isaiah prophecy, and we're talking about Gog and Magog, and we have these 10 groups of nations that will set up in the end time. Many people before used to think it was 10 specific nations. Since the early 90s, I've been understanding it as trading blocks, groups of nations, spheres of influence, just as it's been designed by the Club of Rome, which was formed in the late 60s, to set up these 10 blocks of nations around the world, to send one representative to the world government, just as it talks about this in Revelation and Daniel, the 10 world nation, the 10 empire world government, and just as they like to call this the New Age or the New Atlantis, as Francis Bacon talked about in his book,
Yeah, it's
name
funny.
the New
Yeah.
Atlantis. And
Yeah.
because if you go back to the Atlantean mythology and Greek mythology by Plato in Critias and Timaeus, Poseidon, who is the brother of Zeus, he marries Clymene, a human female, and has 5 sets of Titan twins or Nephilim twins to rule over his 10-nation empire that they regarded as the golden age, an age of high technology, and the helm of world government. So they're trying to recreate that in the
Absolutely.
end time. So now coming out of that, we have in Revelation, we have the kings of the East, which is one of the few references to the peoples of the end time coming from the East. Well, you have coming out of Chinese history and religion, you have the Xia people, which were created by the Li family. And the Li makes all of the kings as they come down through the dynastic history until they're overthrown by the communists as part of the Li family. And we also have a Li that is now in charge of China today and is now moving to make himself like Mao to perhaps become one of these 10 representative kings of the end time.
Kings of 10. Yeah, so you're obviously referring to the 10 kingdoms as mentioned in Revelation.
Yes, and Daniel.
Yeah, and Daniel, yeah, that's a prelude to it.
Mm.
Yeah, it's funny. It's real funny you should talk about, because when you started talking about serpents, that's what permutated my thinking to China, being there, learning about their people coming from the area of the world, the Middle East, in particular Mesopotamia, that Sumerian area, so to speak. And then she said this to me. Her name was Ling Pin, and she said, "Why do you think we built the Great Wall?"
Yeah, to stop
I
the
said,
giants from the north.
"Stop
Yeah,
the time."
yeah,
Yeah, and because I was already familiar with the Nephilim and did my research,
yeah.
not as extensive research that I have been doing, and it just made sense. And that's the thing about it: the more you dig, the more we go deeper down the rabbit hole, everything just starts. It just makes sense. Just as Yeshua said, when the Ruach Hakodesh comes, he'll lead you into all truth, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and the connection here between the dragons of Chinese mythology and all the other mythologies around the world is that in antiquity, the serpent and the dragon were the same being. So
Yeah,
imagine
Yeah.
a serpent before Eden, before the arms being pulled off, the legs
yeah,
being pulled off,
yeah,
taking
Yeah.
away the speech, the intelligence, and everything else. And then,
yeah,
and imagine that also as possibly having wings as opposed to arms, because there'd be many different kinds of this intelligent being. And you
yeah,
have an animal dragon. But if you go back to the angelic fathers and the watchers that you're talking about, these were the seraphim angels who were viper-looking angels, right? And seraph goes back to a fiery serpent.
yeah,
And so their offspring looked just like them. And that's why you have in Revelation 12, Satan being called the great dragon and the serpent and the devil all being linked, right?
yeah.
So,
I watched
and
one of your previous shows where you mentioned this, and that's where it dawned upon me, because Revelation 12. I went, that's why he's called Satan the Great Dragon. So it just makes sense, you know?
yeah. And then when you get into Central America, you have the plumed or the feathered serpent.
Different, yep, yep. Just
Right,
too
so
many.
that again, that's the same thing as a seraphim angel. So
Yeah,
there's no
it's fun.
secret as to why the gods were portrayed as serpents and dragons, because that's what they actually look like, and
Yeah,
why you have so many of the kings and the demigods portrayed the same way, because the offspring look just like them as well.
yeah, absolutely. Look, you're talking about vernacular similarities, and then obviously mythology similarities. So in our culture, uh, we have a taniwha,
Taniwha.
which is depicted the same thing: dragon, serpent. Um, in modern times, it's an eel,
Yep.
which lives in our rivers.
More.
But our ancestors, uh, prehistory, pre colonization, we had these dragons that our ancestors used to refer to called taniwha, which have a striking similarity to what we're just talking about. And then obviously what made me look deeper into the scriptures, especially as I read through Joshua, are these the exploits of Joshua not written in the book of Joshua?
Yep.
And just the fact at that particular scripture where Joshua prayed to Yahuwah to slow down the sun so they could carry on killing these Nephilim, and then in our mythology, pre-colonization, it talks about Maui. In our mythology, slow, harness of curtailing or even stopping the rising of the sun by throwing flex ropes over it. I mean, obviously, flex ropes aren't going to do anything to the sun, but just the metaphoric and simile value to the story of Joshua and then the Taniwha, and I was starting to think, well, maybe our people came from the Chinese, maybe, and then they do DNA research and they find that a lot of our DNA actually stems from Taiwan,
Yeah.
which is the reason why I went there in the first place.
Yeah. Sure, and
I
just
was-
as the Yamamoto dynasty goes back to the Li family and the Xia tribe out of Chinese prehistory. So, I mean, these bloodlines of these giants are still in place. And Putin, who's the the strong arm in Russia today, his last name comes out of nowhere in the 1800s. So his ancestry only goes back to about 1850. And typically what happened in Russia is that if the princes and the nobles had offspring outside of marriage, they wouldn't change the name completely. They'd still keep a name as a variation of the noble name, but because they're illegitimate. So where Putin comes from, this is where the Putyanin noble family that is bloodlines linked back to the original czars that were replaced in about the 1500s goes back to. So now you have like a possible bloodline from Putin going back to Gog and Magog and Scythia in place for the end time, as you have Li rising in China, and there's many Lis around Southeast Asia in very, very powerful situations. And you have all of the families that come from the gods and the demigods in Central and South America. Those families weren't wiped out by the Aztecs. I mean, by the Spanish, I mean. Those families, the original king was, but the rest of the family was kept alive. And within 10 years after being conquered, they regained their noble status to continue their bloodlines and actually intermarried with the Basque and other noble bloodlines out of Europe because their royal bloodlines back to the gods and the Nephilim was recognized by the Nephilim bloodlines and royalty of Europe. And so these bloodlines are all in place to take over the world government as it's set up into 10 blocks of nations or spheres of influence. And then if you look at Daniel 2:43 in the King James Version, where it says it most precisely, and I use 6 or 7 different translations as well as Hebrew, so I can triangulate what they're talking about. You have
this is what I try to do too.
You have this reference that refers to the metallic dynasties, and that is Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and one's gold, one's silver, one's bronze, one's iron, right? And so the descendants of those metallic empires are going to mix with humans. So the offspring of these are going to mix with humans in Daniel 2:43 in this 10
You're
empire world.
the iron and clay, right? Is that what you're
Yes. And so I don't know whether that means that there's going to be some of the empires that aren't Nephilim bloodlines, and those are human that they're intermixing with, or they're all going to be a variation of hybrids coming from the Nephilim lines. But certainly at least half of them are going to be, no matter how you read that, because you have 2 toes, two feet with the toes on it, right? So you've got a split as the legs come down, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking as well. See, I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and they what they taught me about that particular statue, the head of gold, the thoracic region of silver, get down to the
breast of bronze of Greece,
and they represent all those the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, and that's all throughout the Bible too. It's
Romans.
recorded in the Bible with all the King Cyrus, Darius the Mede, and so forth and so forth. And then it was actually Pere who with this technology that we're building, because we're sussing out the materials, because we know that it works, because I built paper prototypes, paper of all things, the austerity of that. I was like, wow, okay, so we start deliberating on other materials, and then Pere starts talking about, well, why don't we just copy what the statue's made out of? Because
Yeah.
that's a dream from Yahuwah. So if it's a dream from Yahuwah, there's got to be something within the properties of this particular materials. So that's exactly what we're doing. Not to let anything else out of the bag, but when you started speaking about this particular topic or subset of topic with the iron and clay, that's what juggled the permutations and the subset of the lines that I've been researching. And wow, clay, the iron, the metallic, which represents those bloodlines, those Nephilim bloodlines, and us being the Gentiles, so to speak, or even us who may have those particular bloodlines represented by that.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story there. Like, I'd just like to share with Gary a bit about my tribal heritage, or my indigenous heritage, and Maori heritage. A sub-tribe called Kai Tangata. Now, Kai means food or to eat, and Tangata means people. So prior to the scriptures and the gospel coming, we were known as the people, which is true. Historically, there was a lot of Luciferian activity going on, and my dad he's born in 1928, so he tells me some of these old things, and he became saved, and we got saved, and it's interesting how when we observed, we're so familiar with what is going on, and about cymatics, I mean, I talk about the power of
You seem to be breaking up there, Peter. You seem to be breaking up there.
cymatics is sound.
Peter, can you hear me? Bro, can you hear me? You seem to be breaking up, bro. You might be too far away from your router.
Oh, okay. I'll try and move.
We're just getting a lot of interference. So if you want to start moving closer to your router, we can hear you now. Or I can.
I can hear him now. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. So, and how Tony was talking about Tanifa being these serpents. There's where her sacred mountain is called a mountain called Maunga Tanifa, and it means te mau o ngā tanifa, or the capture of the tanifa on those mountains. And so there's forces there.
Yeah, we're still having minor difficulties with you.
I've got to get testimony. How's it now?
It's probably just going to have to sit next to your... It's probably because they got electrical appliances on, which affects transmission of the 2.5 megahertz, which comes from your router.
It was near my dad's room. He had a salt lamp on.
Oh, yeah, that'll be it. Yeah. We can hear you.
How's that?
Now. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Salt lamps interferes with wireless.
Yeah, because it's crystal wave.
Yeah. Himalayan salt lamp. Jeez. Yeah, and like the tribe is called Te Pātū, and in English it means. So this tribe had the ability to the portals in their region, like summon in ours and try and create always that tribe, and everyone was trying to go for those portals sort of stuff. So what you for any context is something that my first cousin, he gave evidence to the Waitangi Tribunal for land losses, and he had to share this esoteric knowledge to the court. I was just like, oh my gosh. So it's interesting how Gary is just so, in terms of, like, from a cultural perspective, is like, yep, this guy's got it right there. He's got it right there. It's right there. And it's like, wow. It's just amazing how two different cultures under the, under Christ can actually come to agreements. It's like, yes. And the great thing is, I've said throughout today, is the devil doesn't try and create anything new. All he does is try and mimic God and try and deceive people. So I think the greatest thing about these shows is that we can shed light to the people out there, that they can actually see. It's like, okay, so if that is the imposter, then let's go to the true God.
Yeah,
Would you concur with that?
Oh, absolutely. And to share accounts that come from the history of Australia and find that it has such a similar and consistency to, legends, religious stories, mythologies from around the world. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. Just too many connections. There's far too many connections. And he's actually talking about our culture here in New Zealand. He just lives
New
in
Zealand.
Australia.
I live in Australia.
But even you alluding to the Aboriginal people in Australia, Gary, where they have the rainbow serpent,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and those similarities in this, and then you're referring to ancient cultures, even modern day cultures, who probably don't even know the profundity of these connections. They just see it as art,
Yep.
and symbols that aren't really researched or given the respect that they deserve,
Yep.
which should be researched, so that we find out more about our history, like the Stonehenge. I think there's a Stonehenge in Armenia,
Mm-hmm.
which is built. It's probably something built by the occult worship circles to mimic possibly Stonehenge in England, and then obviously pyramids all around the world. But there's just too many connections, and the more research that I do, and I'm sure the more research that you do, it's just further corroborates
Yes. Yes.
the Bible and what Yahweh was actually trying to tell us through the prophets, just like Yeshua
Yep.
alludes to in Luke 24, where he said, "Go back to Moshe, go back
Mm-hmm.
to the prophets, to the Torah, and to the Tanakh." Yeah.
Exactly. So that's and after a while, that's all you're really learning. You get more testimony to there's a global story, and it's like it's shouting to us out of the mists of prehistory, and it's giving us a warning. And there's all of these forces that are working to ensure that message doesn't get through, and is kept and controlled, and then so that they can shape it for how they want to shape it in the end time.
Yeah. For example,
that's right.
I mean, here's another topic that we could touch on, with the Nazis in particular, Heinrich Himmler, how Adolf Hitler was shaped by, I've forgotten his name, teaching him theosophy and occult worship, and how they
Eckhart.
well, you can elaborate on that further, but just the fact that, because I did some research on it, and I learned how the Nazis through mediums were led to Fuel Land, which they deemed to be Iceland or Greenland, And so they went there in search of the Edda, which then led them to Tibet, to the Hollow Earth, where they made connections there, and then they ended up in Antarctica, and then obviously, you know, to digress, you end up with Operation Deep Freeze, which Admiral Byrd was involved with, and then to me, what looks like a collusion in efforts to get this technology from the Watchers down in Antarctica is in the Book of Enoch, and all these connections with occult worship, advanced technology, and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, the Nazis are, and I have a full chapter devoted to them in my book because to me it's an analogy of the end time. It's another parallel because nothing is new under the sun, just as Nimrod was another analogy and another Antichrist figure, just as Hitler is an Antichrist figure, just as Nostradamus would predict him as one of the Antichrist figures, as Napoleon was, because they all do the same sort of thing. And the Nazis are created through the secret societies that are going to develop Theosophy, which was, you know, Eastern mysticism, which is the Western form is Gnosticism, but it goes a bit rogue, and they call it Ariosophy. And the Reich Church that they opened in 1933 is distinctly different than Christianity because it's an occult religion, right? And so now you have this occult religion of Babylon in place. You have a Messianic false Messiah figure, Hitler, in place, and they have a ideology, religion, and a mythology that goes back to the antediluvian epoch, back to Thule, which you were referring to, which is one of the secret societies, the Thule Society, which is their Asgard or their Atlantis. And some people say it's a separate civilization in the antediluvian epoch, and other people say it's the same as the Atlantean one, which they believe were dominated and ruled by and advanced by a race of giants called the Aryans, who had blonde hair and blue eyes. And this is the bloodlines that they're trying to backwards engineer through I'm getting some feedback here, but through trying to purify the race, to recreate these giants through bloodlines. That's the new man, which is the same as the Nephilim concept that they're talking about. And these are the giants that come out of the race of the Tuatha De Danann, which are the Scythians that we talked about. And remember earlier in our show, they advanced up into Germany and into Sweden and over into England. So this is the blonde hair, blue-eyed, white-skinned giants, as opposed to the red hair, green-eyed or hazel-eyed giants that go over to Ireland and the Tuatha De Danann, but it's the same sort of people. So they're marrying this Nephilim ideology, trying to create this Fourth Reich, which is again the false millennium that they're trying to create, a 1,000-year reign by Hitler that's going to be a world empire. Now they went a little bit rogue and they started to turn on the Jewish Satanists even, and so that's when they turn against them because they're the funders of the banks, right? They are the banks, and they turn the Allies by funding them and guiding them to take on the Germans to bring them down. If you look at what happens in Germany during this process, they go from no technology to developing the greatest weapons you've ever seen, even to the point of creating rockets and jet engines, let alone the Panzer tanks and their strategy of war, to this bell-shaped sort of device that looks like the temples in Southeast Asia in a lot of cases, that they believe is some sort of portal. So again, you have all of this ideology of Nimrod, the giants, the antediluvian rebellion, all coming together over and over and over in trying to bring about the end time and this rendezvous with destiny to have this showdown with God, because they want to bring it on, because they've been deceived that they believe they can win.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention this explosion, this exponential explosion of advanced knowledge and advanced technology, and how and the means that they employed to ascertain that information, especially starting off with just the minimal information they would have had, and then along comes, I think it's Victor Schauberger with his rockets inventions, and then water implosion,
Yep.
UFOs,
Yep.
etc., etc.
Well, and they believed that they were receiving this information from these guides. And again, it's part of that occult theosophic or Ariosophy, as they like to call it, and a combination of the
Yep.
real concept, which comes out of the Rosicrucians, which is all about bloodlines that go back to giants that they're trying to backwards engineer to create a
Yeah.
new man. And so all of this is exactly identical. And so this knowledge is coming from these celestial masters, right? And the Rosicrucians, and they are sort of at the apex of the secret societies because at the top level, it's all purebloods.
Yeah.
And they're in constant communication with the demons and the fallen angels or aliens or celestial masters or the Great White Brotherhood or all these other different names, spirit guides that you hear around the world to receive the knowledge. But they have to be in a position to develop it. So seemingly once they're in a position, all of a sudden they receive this rapid advancement of technology from their demon sponsors and their fallen angel sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I believe. I went and had a look at the Book of Enoch and read about the seven mountains and I think it was the three to the east, and then if you go down into Antarctica itself, you look at and obviously I'm drawing connections between the Nazis going down to Antarctica, and then I've forgotten the mountain, the highest elevated mountain. I forgot
Everest?
the name of it, and I think that was the ones to the east because if you're looking south,
Yeah.
actually, if you're on a map, if you're in the Middle East or the Savant, which is where Rob Skeever believes that the Garden of Eden was, Egypt area, which which makes sense if you corroborate that evidence together. But if you go east, the east would be Everest, which is what you just mentioned, and then if you go south, then you get, I think it's I've forgotten the name of the mountain, but there's the highest peak there in Antarctica, and it's almost like that particular mountain that is referred to in the Book of Enoch. It's like a talisman, and for me, I think this information, just as you said, the Nazis were getting it through their theosophy, occult worship, employing mediums to
So,
ascertain this advanced knowledge.
so your understanding of the seven sacred mountains, as it's called in the occult, is a standard and a constant. And so, whether or not it's Chinese mythology and religions, they have seven sacred mountains. Just as there was seven major gods, and again, just as you have seven major watchers outlined in Enoch, along with Satan being the eighth. But it's, I mean, he's on a different sort of plane than the seven watchers there, or the seven gods of Mount Olympus. The seven gods and seven sacred mountains and seven antediluvian civilizations is a constant standard, although some variations will have 4 and some will have 9. But the general consensus is 7 major antediluvian cult centers ruled over by a god that are essentially setting up the same pantheon around the world. So it's interesting how all of these constants keep coming out.
They keep coming up. They keep appearing, and like I even said to the people who are giving us our funding to do the research for our technology, we're just rehashing it. That's all we're doing, just rehashing it. And they're like, well, then you can't IP it, can you? And I said, well, we can, because no one else is doing it. And if they are, well, maybe they've IP'd it, etc., etc. It's real interesting how you get this common recurring theme with those 7 mountains and everything else from esoteric ancient knowledge that obviously Yahuwah was giving to the obedient angels, and then how that was usurped, as you say, is the common theme with counterfeiting God's technology, his knowledge, the constructs of that technology is represented in structures and symbols in our modern times and from the dawn of mankind.
Yeah. Yeah. At some point in time, you have to say these aren't coincidences. That
Yeah.
we have a
Yeah,
common history.
yeah, exactly. Because for me, as I started conducting my research, I was like, wow, smoking guns, smoking guns, smoking guns, and there's too many smoking guns. If anything, there's just an overwhelming evidence of elephants in the room.
Yeah, I agree. And again, we have sort of on that sort of theme of those ancient civilizations being set up. 7 doesn't really match up with the 10, right?
Yeah,
That is
Yeah,
is in the
that's
end
right.
times. So again, we need to be a little bit careful with how we translate what's going to happen in the end time, and
yeah,
use our guide as the Bible, because again,
yeah,
we
yeah,
don't get 7 sacred
That's right.
mountains out of the Bible, but we do get the understanding that mountains are sacred and the high places of the pantheon, just as the high place of God also has a mountain. So again, we
yeah,
want to
yeah.
be careful with that. So,
Yeah,
and
I watched the show, one of your shows, because I was doing my research on high places as mentioned in Deuteronomy 12, and then you go through the line of kings, first kings, second kings, and you see these high places mentioned all the time, and possible geometric shapes, and then along comes Hezekiah, and I think there were seven kings who were obedient to Yahuwah. But Hezekiah, he actually destroyed the high places and the
yes,
altars and the high
yes,
places, the places of worship, the Baal. Um, and then, but you see, if you understand the Mueddin, which is what we touch on a lot in our shows, just with myself and Pere, and then because if you understand the Mueddin, and you look at an incident like Sodom and the destruction of Sodom, it says that Lot was giving unleavened bread to the angels. So I'm looking at that and I go, well, the only time the Israelites ever ate unleavened bread was at Pesach, at Passover. So to me, even though that was before Moses' time, because it's talking about Abraham, then obviously they knew about the Muad'Dim before Moses.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, and then you elaborate further when you learn about. Is that you, Pete?
Oh, it's the
Is that coming from your side? It's the neighbours.
no, it's my son and his cousin. Well,
Okay. But yeah,
trying to
just
turn the
like,
tunes in.
because we've been teaching people about the Muad'Dim here in New Zealand and Australia via our show, the appointed times, we actually just formed a trust called Tonu, which is Māori for perpetuation or continual, the continuance of something. We called it Tonu Muad'Dim Trust. Shameless plug. But we're going to be plugging your book and what you're doing later in the show. But I just when I started understanding resonant frequencies and possibly why Yahuwah constructed the Moedim around the moon cycle, and then having a look at when the Moedim occur, Pesach occurs on Nisan 14, which is the full moon, the spring equinox with respect to the northern hemisphere. And then you get Yom Kippur, you get Rosh Hashanah, which happens on a new moon. Happened this year on the 21st, 22nd, and then you had that so-called Revelation 12 sign in the heavens, um, which could possibly be a deception or a delusion. And then you come to Yom Kippur, which happens on a half moon, and then the Day of Atonement, which led me to look at Leviticus 16, and then Azazel is mentioned there again. And I think if we look at occult worship, and how our enemy, in terms of our physical adversaries here on Earth, they're practicing their occult worship at the same times, and killing and actually sacrificing people to Lucifer as their god, or to the other gods, possibly the fallen angels or Nephilim, who set up structures, and how that knowledge was passed down to them, etc., etc.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, we've almost been going for 2 hours, so I think we could conclusion and draw the conclusion there. But look, I just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and being
Yes,
brothers.
appreciate it, Gary.
I deeply appreciate you coming on our show and having someone with vast knowledge. I mean, brings me back to reality again, where we are, and how much more we need to learn, and
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
you know, we're always stealing nuggets from your show, because a lot of people down here don't know about you, which is another reason why I wanted to bring you on our show. And then people can start to see, oh, these guys aren't just making this stuff up. This guy's from Canada. Brother Rob Skiba is from the United States, and then other brothers all around the world, and forming this network, where we can divulge this information to people, and ultimately alert them to what's coming, because what's coming is the wrath of Halalel, and then obviously the wrath of Yahuwah. They're two totally separate things.
Mm-hmm. And the Great Delusion. So people will not be able to rely on their leaders or their religious leaders, and they better be well grounded in the scriptures. Otherwise, they're going to be deceived. And that's the big thing. And it's coming at people in a way that they won't understand. And they've been brainwashed not to understand. So that's why we have to get out there and talk about these things and give them the language of what the cult is doing to bring about the Great Delusion, because even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, and it will be possible because prophecy predicts that. So I do appreciate you bringing me on the program and to speak to your audience.
I mean, we're
we might have to do the show live from Australia here. Next time, Gary, bring you and Rob down. I'll fly you down and do it live from Australia.
Hey, that'd be
Give
awesome.
you guys a holiday. Well, we'll work on it. We'll work on it.
Yeah. Work on it. Definitely. I actually want to organize, because I'm flying to Perth next Wednesday, and I actually want to set up. I want to organize a show where we could possibly bring you, LA, Steve, Rob, Timothy, Brother John Pounders, John Hall, David Carrico to Australia. Yeah, that's something that I'm definitely looking at. I've been thinking about it for a while, actually, and we'd love to do that. Bring the heavy slingers of esoteric knowledge of the word to the Southern Hemisphere would be just amazing.
That'd be an awesome conference, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And just. Oh, sorry.
You go, Peter. You go. No, you go, bro. You go.
Oh, just if your family or friends are, going down to New Zealand or thinking about going down to New Zealand, Australia, give us an email or buzz, and we'll see where they are. If we can meet them or know places where to go, we'll let you know.
Okay, absolutely, we'll do so. So I want to throw in a couple of references for. If we've talked about anything that in the audience that you'd like to know more about or get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me through Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I do regular in-depth posts. I also have 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages you can get a hold of me or follow me on. I also have a group called Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, where there's always lots of things going on there on Facebook.
Yeah.
You can also follow me on Twitter at Gary Wayne 63, at Gary Wayne 63. You can also go to my website. That's the Genesis6conspiracy.com with the number 6, Genesis6conspiracy.com. You can email me through there if you want as well. If you're interested in having a peek at my book, I've got a generous excerpt on all 98 chapters there, so you can get a look at it. It's got connections to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and Barnes & Noble,
Nice.
which isn't much help on your side of the ocean, but perhaps the Kindle format link might be, because it's available in digital format. And if anybody does want a signed copy,
getting Amazon to Australia soon, yeah.
Yeah, you can go to the US page, and if you fill that out, I'll pick up the extra cost to get it to Australia. I do that regularly for all overseas customers. I don't have a overseas page; it's too complicated. So you can get a signed copy if you want, if you're interested in my book. But the main thing is getting the information out. So if you have questions and you want to get a hold of me, I'll guarantee you I will get back to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, then, Gary. Much appreciated.
For those of you who are interested in this stuff, what I'll do is I'll get all the links via email from brother Wayne, and I'll actually stick them in the bottom description box or dialogue box of the show. So as people look you up, and this will be one of the links that'll pop up, and then that's
Terrific.
the links below in the description. Yeah, be more than happy to do that. Look, brother Gary, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on the show. Yeah, it's just absolute honor. You're one of the heaviest slingers. You know, you're right up there. In my books with the Steve Quayles, the LA Marzulis, the Rob Skebers, highly researched. When I came across you on Brother John Pounder's show, I just started looking for your stuff, and I was learning a lot, and learning a lot from different brothers and sisters, but just the real historical connection that I get from you and Brother Skiba, and how that links to cultural, because we're very cultured. We've been raised in culture, and I draw those cultural parallels and those cultural connections, and that's why I connect to your research and Brother Rob Skiba's research more profoundly. It just really resonates and reverberates.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, look, you're a busy man, and we don't want to keep detaining you. So just thank you once again for being on our show. And I'll get all those links. I'll send you an email straight after this, or if you could just email me with all the links
I will.
that you provided verbally, provide them in email, and I'll put them straight into the description of the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Coming on our show once again, and in the name of our Lord and Savior Yeshua HaMashiach, Yahweh bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.